Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new episode of our program, The Daily Debate. It's Wednesday evening. I'm Yasmin Bakir, and tonight we're going to be shedding light on the first Russia-Africa Economic Summit that is currently running at the Russian city of Sochi. And of course, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi not only representing Egypt in the summit, but also the entire African continent, especially as Egypt is currently running for the presidency of the African Union. The importance of such a summit, the interest of Russia into the African continent, the mutual and joint benefit or cooperation that could take place along the economic lines, or even in terms of international relations between Russia and the entire African summit, and the Egyptian-Russian bilateral relations in the current phase, and much more about this very important summit is what we're going to be talking about during our episode this evening. Before we kick off with the outcomes of the first day of the summit, the most important points on the agenda of this first day or sessions, and our expectations for a final communique that will be coming out tomorrow on the second and last day of this summit. Let's take a look at what's heading our top story this evening. And the British news company BBC had contributed to spreading a number of rumors with the aim of harming the Egyptian state during the previous month. Now, BBC continues to support systematic media campaigns also against the interest of the Egyptian state. The channel's editorial policy in the Middle East has often been in line with the editorial policy of the Brotherhood terrorist group. For example, the BBC propagated hashtags of "Rest assured you're not alone," with the aim of actually overthrowing the state and calling the Egyptians to demonstrate, but that campaign had failed to achieve its objectives. Also, the BBC had recently published a report on Hassan al-Banna, also chronicling this group's emergence and political activity, in which is an attempt to describe al-Banna and his group as a group that carried out armed struggle against the British occupation, ignoring, of course, the violence and assassinations, and described the dispute between the Brotherhood and the state as a political dispute only. Speaking at the opening of the session of the Russia Economic Forum, and much more about the issues concerning this topic for today, we're going to be shedding right after the break. But first, commenting on this important top story for this evening regarding BBC as a media corporate and how it's spreading its rumors and how it is tailoring its editorial policy against the Middle East, or Egypt in particular. We're very much delighted to have joining me over the phone Dr. Hussein Amin, a mass communication expert. Thank you very much for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Amin, now, of course, you've heard the top stories today, and I am sure that over and over again, as a media expert, you know the attempts of the BBC in and concerning the editorial policy, if it's called a systematic, possibly media campaign that it's launching against the Middle East or Egypt in particular. From your field, what can you tell us?
I think that it's, the BBC was completely biased, introducing such a story in the midst of all the kind of success of the Egyptian leadership, with particular reference to the Russian-African summit in Russia, was meaningless. And one of the things that my colleagues commented on it, that this is unheard of. And the BBC, by doing this, is compromising its credibility, not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East as well. So I think that certain measures must be taken legally to correct the situation from within, meaning that we know that the BBC is the public broadcast of the UK, and therefore it operates in an environment where there is a mass to provide balanced news to not only British audience, but to international audiences as well. In this sense, this situation was compromised, and this campaign is a kind of a hate campaign because it delivers a very negative message at a time where a lot of efforts been done to have peace in the Middle East, to have peace in Egypt, and to have stability as well. So in this sense, I think that they were wrong, and they should reconsider the position if they want to continue having audience in Egypt and in the Middle East.
Now, throughout several years, Dr. Amin, the BBC had always taken the side of the Brotherhood terrorist group and intending to stress on the fact that what is happening is actually a different policy or a policy difference dispute where they are totally neglecting their violence and assassinations and threats against the national security of Egypt.
Indeed. I think this is actually a threat to national security, and therefore must be taken seriously in the country, in Egypt. And therefore, there are the Supreme Council of Media Regulation is considering, of course, the situation, as well as other entities. There are so many entities. They are responsible for media regulations, and they giving licenses for offices inside Egypt and outside. Also the State Information Service, SIS, is also responsible for sending messages not only to the BBC but also the Ofcom authority, which is controlling the media regulation in the UK, telling them about this bias and the message to promote violence and working against all kinds of efforts by leaderships, not only world leaders actually, who came together to appraise what the state of Egypt have been done, dealing with all kinds of violence that was introduced back in 2011, for example. And the most important thing that if we reverse the situation, and we think that the Nile News International, for example, will take a situation like this person and try to internationalize it, place a judgment over Nile TV. So we will think that it's violating all kinds of records and all kinds of books related to broadcasting and international broadcasting. This is, again, unheard of and a situation that must be dealt with. And the BBC must really take certain steps to correct the matter from within, and also all kinds of entities that governing international broadcasting in this country must also taking certain steps to put some pressures on the BBC leadership as well as the Ofcom, even if it takes, introducing a case to the British government about this violation.
My final question to you, Dr. Amin, and since you've talked about regulations and entities or different media outlets taking some form of action against false news and fake news, and mind you, a number of occasions and during the Arab media ministers meeting under the umbrella of the Arab League, they have mentioned over several years the need to have the code of ethics controlling or regulating the circulating news on the media, especially the online broadcasting, which has no control whatsoever. From your field of experience monitoring and running several committees here in the media throughout your years, Dr. Amin, do we still need a long way to go before we can actually put a concrete communique to be able to follow a set of regulations that anybody working in the media, whether in Egypt on the national level or even international foreign media in Egypt, should abide by?
The question of media regulations when it comes to transnational, international broadcasting was freezed back in 2008 when we introduced the Arab Satellite Charter, where 20 countries out of the 22 countries approved the charter, but 2 countries, one abstained and the other one did not reject and this is the state of Qatar, I guess, because of the Al Jazeera networks. But again, this kind of charter was not really invented from a vacuum. It was placed on the European Service Directive, which was introduced actually as television without frontier kind of document that governing broadcasting transnationally and internationally in the continent of Europe, and it's very similar to it. This question of reintroducing the Arab Satellite Charter in a new way could be done with approaches to this kind of media regulations under the umbrella of the League of Arab States. And if they do it, then they will have a tool of pressure they can apply, especially when a transnational, transborder satellite station coming, delivering messages, promoting violence, trying to create kinds of hatred, destabilize regimes. These kind of things are not permissible anywhere in Europe or in the United States or even in Asia.
Yes, of course.
We have seen, so many documentation about some countries really complaining to the European Union in this sense. I believe that a code of ethics should be introduced immediately, and I believe also that the code of ethics should be done through a consortium of satellites, not only through the Arab League, but through the main satellite carriers covering the Middle East. Because this kind of violations, they can go by without being noticed. However, the mainstream media, which comes to us in the Middle East, in our language, in our culture, facing Arabic and Egyptian audiences, operating from our own satellites, they must respond to certain measures. These measures could be laws, could be regulations, could be under the umbrella of Arab League of States, or could be by the Arab and Egyptian entities like the Supreme Council for Regulations and SIS, for example. Otherwise, we will see more violation, and you have mentioned correctly the online, and there is nothing as regulation covering the online broadcasting. But again, this kind of media regulations, online regulations, or new media regulations must be introduced. Otherwise, more of this is going to happen. More of this is going to divide the nations. More of this is going to incite hate and recruit violence, and all kinds of things could be happening afterwards. We are not going to wait until something damages the stability of the regime and the stability of Egypt, and then we start taking certain measures. I think that time is now, and we should really act as soon as we can.
Dr. Hussein Amin, Professor Hussein Amin, Professor of Mass Communication and Journalist, and thank you very much for joining us on Nile TV International. And going back again to our topic this evening, the first African-Russian Economic Forum taking place in Sochi right after this report, where we'll see what happened on the first day at the opening session.
لازم تعرفوا كلكم الشعب المصري بقى واعي قوي.
During the first ever Russia-Africa summit, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi called on Russian and international firms to invest in Africa, stressing that this is the ideal time for economic openness to the continent. President el-Sisi also urged regional and international funding bodies to back development efforts in the continent by offering special conditions and powerful incentives to projects and developmental programs there. Speaking at the opening session of the Russia-Africa Economic Forum, President el-Sisi urged African leaders to work to improve business climate and promote private-public partnership in the region and unite to achieve peace, stability, economic growth and development for its peoples. Russian President Vladimir Putin told the gathering that his country is among the top 10 importers from Africa, but called for further boosting of trade with the continent. It's worth noting that Russia is setting up a major industrial zone comprising 23 firms in a planned international industrial and logistics hub near Egypt's Suez Canal, and there are plans for more firms to join the future. During a meeting with President el-Sisi right after the summit, Putin stated that Russia is working very actively and aims to invest $190 million in infrastructure development projects to attract up to $7 billion. Noteworthy, Russia-Egyptian relations were developing very positively, with trade turnover growing by 14% last year to reach $7.7 billion. The Russian leader stated that the United Arab Emirates is very interested in taking part in joint development plans between Cairo and Moscow in the production sector. President el-Sisi focused on the fact that African countries are putting infrastructure development and promoting economic integration at the forefront of joint cooperation. A number of trade, economic and investment agreements is expected to be signed after the forum concludes.